Hello everyone and welcome to Transcendent Philosophy. This is Seth here, and today we're going to be discussing the most central question. What is Transcendent Philosophy? Okay. Well, to start off, we should discuss a little bit what transcend means, right? Or what transcendence means. So on my homepage, we can go down here to get a little perspective. Definition of transcend: to go farther, to rise above and beyond normal limitations. You're going beyond in a way that is more important, better, or greater in scope than what came before. So, transcending, it's kind of like leveling up, doing something a little bit better, tapping into new potential, new opportunity, right? Okay, so transcending, we got that down. Now what about transcendent? Well, when you add the suffix ent, you're just basically acting like you're going to promote this thing. So you're going to promote more transcendence, right? So promoting everyone leveling up would be transcendent. That's one way to think about it. So we've got transcendent. Now what about philosophy? Philosophy is basically the love of wisdom, or you can think of philosophy as a systemic approach to wisdom. So in combination, transcendent philosophy, it's a body of wisdom that is aimed at promoting the leveling up of everyone. And in this context, we're specifically thinking of ideological transcendence, right? Ideas need to level up. Now, you could ask, where do ideas exist? That's a complicated question. Mostly ideas exist in the mind. But ideas can kind of form coalitions, right? So you've got the individual who has ideas, then you've got tribal groups that have ideas, and then you have large nations that have ideas. And so each of these different layers could be thought of metaphorically as an organism. There's a superorganism and an even larger superorganism, right? And so thinking about transcendent philosophy, why are we leveling up? We're leveling up because we want to solve problems better. And we've got problems at multiple levels of analysis, right? There could be a war, for example, a war between Russia and Ukraine. How are we supposed to face that war, right? We could face it with a low-level mentality with low-quality ideas, or we could transcend and face it with higher-quality ideas, right? And I think that if we face these problems with higher quality ideas, we're going to have a better world and things are going to get better for everyone. So at a minimum, transcendent philosophy is going to look at 3 layers of analysis. How do we get the individual to transcend? How do we get the tribe to transcend? How do we get the state to transcend? Right? And so we're dealing with psychology, we're dealing with sociology, and with geopolitics, right? These are very complicated questions. I don't expect anyone to have all the answers, but within the framework of transcendent philosophy, we've got the goal. Maybe we don't know how to get everyone to be harmonious towards world peace, but at least we have the goal. We know where we're looking. We're looking at all these different levels, and we have the goal of trying to harmonize in a better way with better ideas. And so at the layer of psychology, we probably have all of these cognitive biases that throw off our calculations. All of these logical errors and fallacies that we engage in. So to transcend at the individual level is to try to learn all of the ways that individual psychology goes wrong so individuals can make less mistakes. And then at the level of the tribe, at the level of sociology, we're going to be looking at how different races or communities can have a more open-minded perspective towards each other and harmonize in that way, and getting rid of some of the irrational biases that cause conflict between different groups. And then at the level of geopolitics, we're going to want to explore how nations can start to work together more harmoniously. The relationship between different nations, how that can be augmented, what obstacles are in the way of better communication between nations, and what type of biases are affecting relationships between nations. So, simply put, transcendent philosophy is the wisdom that is needed to rise above normal human limitations, right? It's the wisdom that's going to guide us towards a better future and evolve us to be more competent in order to maintain a better future. So, if this sounds interesting to you, if something within you says, I actually care about this. I care about the leveling up of society. I care about more intelligent and harmonious conflict resolution. I care about, unity and world peace and global cooperation. I think it would be great to have a world like this. If that's how you feel, then this is your call to adventure, because transcendent philosophy is what we need. We need to figure out all the obstacles and all the strategies that need to be implemented to mitigate the problems, get around the obstacles, and shoot towards our goal. So simply put, our purpose is to help individuals transcend biases, to help groups transcend ideology, and to help nations transcend rivalry. And I think these 3 steps combined will probably move us along in the right direction, and maybe there'll be more to come, but that's a good start. So now I'm going to try to do a little mind reading. If you are the type of person that finds this project attractive, you're probably a big picture thinker. You probably ponder the future a little bit. And you're probably concerned about a lot of different things. There's a lot of issues that are on the horizon. We're in a phase of rapid technological development, lots of cultural evolution, lots of things are shifting around, and it could be concerning about the different trajectories that different societies could be heading in. And so you, unlike other people, you see the power of change. You see the power of the individual as a node within a network. You understand that we don't need to be nihilistic and fatalistic. Some people just say, there's all these problems, we're all going to die, who cares, eat, drink, and be merry, right? Or the religious types, God has already told us that we're all going to die, so we're just going to prepare for death. We're not going to try to change our fate. We're just going to get ready for our fate. But you're different. You're different from both groups. You believe in the power of the individual to affect the future. And you believe in the power of ideas. You think that if we can level up our ideas, then we can level up society. That's an interesting superpower that you have that others don't. In fact, I think it would be safe to say that from an archetypal standpoint, you have the spirit of a hero, because you are that heroic individual that is going to face the chaos of the unknown future and try to do something about it. And I think that's honorable. And so if you have the desire to try to figure out how to level up some ideas in order to make the world a better place, welcome aboard. This is Transcendent Philosophy. We're going to figure it out together. Now, I want to make something very clear. I am not a leader. I am not a guide. I am not even an expert. I don't want anyone to view me as an authority that they should follow. In my opinion, the follow the leader type of mentality is low-level thinking that needs to be transcended. What can we transcend to? Well, something like partnership, right? You and me, we're partners in trying to figure this out together. If I get something wrong, I want you to come into the comment section, straighten me out so we can both benefit and learn from each other. And, I'm not expecting you to be an expert either. We can't all be experts. In fact, even the experts can't be experts in everything. It's hard to know everything. But nowadays, more than ever, a polymath perspective of the world is more and more important. A deep understanding of multiple areas is almost preferable than expertise knowledge in one area. Because if you're an expert in only one area, you're blind to a lot. But when you know a lot of all the different areas, you have a more balanced view, a more integrated view, and you can see the things that need to be seen through the interconnections between the fields. So the more you know, the better. And whatever you bring to the table, maybe you have a little expertise in sociology, someone else has some expertise in psychology. When we join together, we're bringing all of these skills together. We're becoming a collective polymath. We're leveling up as a superorganism. And so the more of us that can pull together on this project, the better. Because with all of our skills and all of our knowledge combined, we're going to have a great level of depth and breadth to our vision as to how to solve these problems. But the main thing that you need to bring to the table is a burning passion. A burning passion to make the world a better place. A burning passion for peace, harmony, cooperation, love, all the good things that life has to offer. Because I know that if you have that passion will give you the motivation to learn what needs to be learned, to share what needs to be shared, and to do what needs to be done so that we can all level up together. Okay. You've got the passion. You're willing to get started. Now what? What do we got to do? Well, let's think. What are the 3 branches of philosophy? Some people reduce philosophy to metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology. What are those? You could simplify metaphysics into saying something like fundamental truths, and epistemology could be the fundamental methods of getting evidence to prove those truths. And axiology would be our fundamental values, okay? So, we're dealing with truth, we're dealing with values, and we're dealing with how do we come to know the truth or the values, right? How do we learn? So those are the 3 aspects that we're going to need to focus on if we're going to develop some wisdom to level everyone up. I think we're going to want to have a starting framework when thinking about metaphysics. Now, there's really esoteric perspectives on metaphysics that are kind of like the stuff that's before the Big Bang. I'm not super interested in that because I don't think it has a lot of relevance to our society. So what type of metaphysics is more relevant to our society? Well, metaphysics can be more loosely thought of as the hypothetical patterns of reality, right? Maybe there's some patterns of reality that we're not fully aware of. And so I think we can loosely term spiral dynamics as falling under metaphysics. So if we're talking about patterns in reality, I think integral theory presents a very interesting paradigm. Integral theory presents the spiral dynamics model for understanding the evolution of consciousness, the evolution of culture, fundamentally the evolution of values and ideas, okay? So if we're trying to level up ideas, it would be interesting to have a theory for the evolution of ideas. And from one phase to the other, maybe that's a way to level up. So as you can see, within spiral dynamics, there's at least 8 steps in this hierarchy or on this spiral. And you've got, at the very bottom, you've got the survival stage. Survival stage. So you can think about this both at the level of the individual and at the level of the collective, right? When you're just born into the world, everything, your value system, it's all about survival. Where's my milk, right? That's basically all you can manage at that time. And maybe same thing for a caveman society, right? They're just trying to get their next meal. They don't have time to think about anything else, right? There's a Maslow's hierarchy of needs kind of was an inspiring factor in the development of spiral dynamics. So after we get our needs figured out, then we want security, right? And so the infant is going to start to build relationships with their parents, and they're going to feel secure with their parents, and they're going to feel very insecure with anyone else. And at the level of society, you've got like tribalism, where they're starting to get insecure about the elements. It's like, okay, I've got my food figured out, but what about the storm? Or what about the winter? Is that going to mess me up? And what are there some spirits or gods that I need to work with in order to survive and get more security? So there's a certain religious mentality or a superstitious mentality starts to evolve at this stage. And then you've got the red stage, which is the power stage or the impulsive stage. And this is kind of when individuals like toddlers, they get really obsessed with like power. Like the toddler learns the word no, and they start saying the word no with all the force that they can, you know, and they're really trying to see if they can control the world with their words. And they relish that power, the ability to say no and crush someone's will with your words. And at the level of the society, this is the stage of warfare, the stage of conquering tribes, You know, it's kind of might makes right philosophy at this stage. The next stage is blue. It's got this authoritarian perspective, this rule perspective. So after the toddler starts to get a little older, they start to learn that there are dangerous things, that if they go touch the fire, they're going to get hurt. If they run across the road, they could get hurt. And so there's certain rules that they have to follow. So their parents are an authority that says, you must follow these rules. And the child doesn't want to. The child's like, why? And the adult understands that the child is not developed enough to understand the principle behind the rules. So what does the parent say? The parent says, because I said so. Obey the rule because I said so. It's a fundamental appeal to authority. And the child has to accept their parents' authority and accept the rule on faith in their parents, right? And so at the collective level, this becomes authoritarian religious cultures. This becomes obey the Bible on faith because Jesus said so, right? You've got this similarity between individual development and cultural development. So after the blue phase, you've got the orange phase. And so what's happening here is the child, they've learned everything they should not do, because that's the blue stage. You learn everything you're not supposed to do. But then what? Now you have to learn what you're supposed to do. So this is the phase of achievement, of setting goals, of improving yourself and improving your score. This is when the child goes into sports and into academic spelling bees and competitions, right? Maybe after school karate, who knows what. And so the achievement mentality, we're less focused on the negative, we're now focused on the positive and where we're going from here. And in the cultural setting, this becomes kind of a capitalist mentality. It's kind of maybe metrics, KPI, key performance indicators. The corporate culture is trying to maximize success, try to outcompete. So this orange phase, it kind of reduces to competition. So you can have individual competition or collective competition. And corporations would be a unit that competes collectively against other corporations. But what happens after we start to realize the problems with competition, right? Competition can kind of get toxic. It can go too far. So when you start to mature even more, you start to realize, maybe focusing on myself isn't the total, it's not the best strategy from a holistic perspective. Maybe there's more to life than just me, right? And so that's when you get to this green stage, which is communitarian, which it's about connection, it's about cooperation, right? So we're going from competition to cooperation. And this is an important stage, right? Evolutionarily, this might have been the most important stage for human evolution. Learning how to cooperate, right? And in the business world, this is, you start to see it in networking. It's like people start to realize it's not all about me, it's about my network. If I can get a really high quality network behind me, that's going to exponentially boost my success, right? And so there's this bigger picture thinking about, there's a better way to compete, and the better way to compete is by cooperation. And so after that stage, the cooperation stage, it starts to realize its own excesses as well. It can devolve into a kind of moral relativism where everything is equal, right? There's this kind of exaggerated equality mentality that's oblivious to reality. Or in reality, we all know that everything is unequal fundamentally. But because of cooperation, we're creating this narrative that everything is equal so that we can cooperate more harmoniously. Well, the yellow level that transcends green, the yellow level starts to realize all of the self-deception that the green level is engaged in. And it says, maybe green is really good, but maybe we need to add back in some objective reality into this perspective, right? We need to make sure that we're not so harmonious that we forget about basic reality. And so this yellow stage, they look backwards and they say, they start to realize each level has its own pros and cons. Each level has its own costs and benefits. And maybe the best approach isn't just a level in its individuality, maybe the best approach is a harmonization of all the levels, a complex, integrated synthesis of all the levels, knowing when to use one level at the right time and when to use a different level at a different time, applying the appropriate strategy to the appropriate circumstance. Maybe that's the best strategy. And so this yellow approach is trying to figure out how to integrate all of these complex ideas into a unified whole. Now, supposedly there's a higher stage than yellow. It's kind of hard to define, but basically whatever the next stage is, the goal of each following stage is to correct the errors of the prior stage. And so maybe as more people develop this yellow cultural zeitgeist, as yellow culture plays out, it might become more obvious what its downsides are. Maybe yellow has some blind spots that we're just not aware of right now. And so this turquoise is going to come in and it's going to try to help us fix whatever yellow got wrong, right? But we're probably not there yet. So I think the goal for Transcendent philosophy is to aim at yellow. If we can get more people to land in yellow, I think that will give us a chance to be leveled up, and maybe we'll be more prepared to level up once more. So, loosely speaking, we've discussed this metaphysical framework for how to level up our ideas, and now we want to discuss epistemology, right? How do we know things, and specifically a meta-epistemology, right? A specific epistemology would be a specific practice to know things. But a meta-epistemology is kind of a method that guides you through the different ways to know things, right? So it's a more flexible, more fluid, more bird's eye view approach, right? And so if we're going to be traversing through multiple paradigms, we're going to want to have this guiding force that helps balance us through and guide us through as we level up. And that meta-epistemology is called the dialectic, okay? And so I'm going to contrast the dialectic with the debate, right? Debate. Debate is often this interchange of ideas, right? And it's hypothetically aimed at truth, right? But the fundamental process is destructive rather than constructive, right? The two opponents are trying to destroy each other, right? With facts, logic, and reasoning, and evidence. So, is that the most productive approach? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it depends on where you fit in the spiral. Maybe lower down the spiral, debate is really awesome. But maybe as you get higher up, you need a more productive approach. The dialectic has the potential to be the most productive approach, because the dialectic, it frames people not as opponents, but as partners. The proper philosophic word is interlocutor, right? I'm engaging with you as a partner. We're going to be discussing ideas together, and our goal is not to destroy each other. Our goal is to work together as partners towards the same goal. The same goal is we both want to learn the truth. And I am humble enough to recognize I don't know everything. And you're humble enough to recognize you don't know everything. And we're both wise enough to realize we can learn from each other, that we both bring different expertise to the table. And so by working together, we can critique each other, we can put forward ideas, and we can evolve our ideas together towards a more refined idea or a more refined perspective. And so a simple way to define the dialectic is this. Dialectic is debate minus ego. Debate minus ego. Subtract the ego, subtract the emotions, subtract the desire to win, subtract the desire to look good, right? To be impressive. If you can subtract that, you've entered into dialectical territory. Now, we're all humans. Is it easy to do that? Probably not. But are we going to be more productive if we can manage it? Probably. A common way to think about the dialectic is in terms of 3 steps. The first step is the thesis. Someone has to present an idea, present a claim, and then someone's got to critique it. The second phase is the antithesis. the antithesis pokes holes in the initial idea. And then finally, the third step is the synthesis, where we incorporate the criticisms, we fix the errors, and we build a new thesis that is now immune to the former criticisms. I think this dialectical method is the way we transcend, right? We've got this thesis, but the thesis is imperfect. It's got flaws. We need our interlocutor to critique us. We need to hear where we are wrong. Once we hear where we're wrong, we're going to have some cognitive dissonance. We're going to be uncomfortable. Our brain is going to try to figure out how to reconnect itself. And then we're going to have a new idea. All of the ideas are going to reconnect in a new way, and we'll build a transcendent perspective. We're going to level up to a better idea. And just one simple diagram for the dialectic is this process of making water, right? You've got hydrogen and you've got oxygen. And if there's a chemical reaction, the hydrogens will bond to the oxygen and it'll produce water. And so you can think of the hydrogen and the oxygen are two opposing forces that are bumping on each other, but they're not destroying each other, they're unifying. They become a new unity, a transcendent whole. They become more than they were before because of this synthesis. Now here's another very rudimentary, simple example. And the problem with these examples is they can get really complex really fast. But this is just a simple way to put it. You could think that the thesis, right? The thesis is political party A is corrupt, right? And maybe you're talking to someone on the opposite side of the aisle and they're critiquing you and saying, no, actually, you guys are corrupt, right? So you've got these two contradictory positions. Political party A is corrupt. Political party B is corrupt. What's going on here? In a simple world of good and evil, one of them's supposed to be good, one's supposed to be evil. How can they both be corrupt? How does that make sense? Then you have a transcendent perspective. You're like, oh, reality isn't a simple childhood comic book. Reality isn't always good and evil. Maybe both of them are corrupt, right? So that's your new transcendent perspective. And that synthesis becomes a new thesis, right? Both parties are corrupt. You could land on that conclusion. But then you've got an alternative argument going on, which is, political party A, they've got some good people in it. And then the person on the other side of the aisle says, well, we got good people on our team too. Well, how does that make sense? Aren't they both corrupt? How can there be good people in these political parties? We got a contradiction here. Oh, we're going to synthesize and say, both political parties have good people in them. And the meta-synthesis, the double synthesis is, it's possible to have two corrupt parties that both have good people in them. Because perhaps people are self-deceptive. Perhaps people are blind to the corruption in their own tribe. Perhaps people have all of these biases that make them not see where they're wrong. They can only see where other people are wrong, right? And so now we're starting to dig down and we're starting to see, as we synthesize, it's starting to highlight more problems. Like, why is there this contradiction? Well, there must be some deep issues in our ideas that are causing these contradictions. If we can unwind these biases, maybe we can have a more coherent picture of the world. Okay, so we've discussed metaphysics, we've discussed epistemology, now we're into axiology. What is axiology? It's the study of axioms, which could be like your values, right? The study of what is your fundamental thing that you care about that guides everything else. Okay, and one of the most important issues for transcendent philosophy is the concept of a value conflict. Okay, and what we need to understand is that values are different from facts, because facts can be like true or false, or facts can involve solvable problems like this method works or this method doesn't work. But values are much trickier, because a value is often, it's two good things being compared to each other, right? For example, a nation's budget. You've only got so much money. So are you going to put the money towards program A or program B, right? You can't put all of the money to everything. You've got to have a priority, and that means you need a hierarchy of values. What's the number one priority? What's the second priority? And maybe the bottom priorities, you don't fund them because you don't have infinite money. So trying to figure out, yeah, there's lots of good things that we could fund, but what are the best things? And so when we're dealing with value conflicts, it's trying to measure which is the best good thing among many good things. And we have to do this every day, right? When our body has multiple value systems, right? We've got the desire to sleep. We've got the desire to eat, the desire to go to the bathroom, desire to play, the desire to chat and socialize. So when you simultaneously desire so many different things, how do you choose which one to do? You have to have a priority. You have to say, okay, right now, sleep is most important. I don't care. I can't play video games any longer. Sleep is now my priority, right? And so your value system is constantly calculating things are moving up and down the priority list, and eventually you kind of cycle through your values. But when we're dealing with social issues, it's often a matter of trade-off, right? And the trolley problem is really valuable for this issue of value conflict because that's exactly what it displays. It gives you, in visual form, two options, right? Are you going to prioritize this or are you going to prioritize that? And the hardest trolley problems are the ones where both of those pathways are very important. You care about both. Both are valuable. So what do you do? Out of two good things, which do you prioritize? And like reasonable people can disagree on trade-offs, right? People from different political parties might disagree about which is priority. And maybe some of those disagreements are respectable disagreements, right? Maybe we can say, you know what? Even though I disagree with you choosing that half of the trolley problem, I can respect that you have a different value system, and I respect that you could prioritize that good thing above my good thing, right? When you put it into that framing, I think it makes society be able to enter a more harmonious level of debate, right? Instead of concluding that other people are evil at the drop of a hat, we conclude that, hey, I recognize you as a good person, I recognize that you disagree, and hopefully I can persuade you otherwise. Now, I do want to caveat this by saying sometimes the conclusion of evil is the right one, right? In Hitler's Germany, the conclusion that the Nazis were evil was the right conclusion. And so I don't want to say we should never engage in that, right? But I think as a society, we jump to those conclusions too often, and it's probably unhealthy. And I'm probably guilty of it just as much as anyone else. But I think it would be better if we figured out how to transcend that. But maybe there's an appropriate time to change strategies. Maybe at one level of analysis, at the yellow level of analysis, it's good to have respectful dialectic. But maybe when things get serious, maybe going down a couple levels, maybe a red strategy, right? Red is the power domination strategy. Maybe that's the appropriate response when things get to that level. So basically, Hitler is at the level of red. So if you're operating at this level of yellow and you're like, oh, I'm nice to everyone, I'm respectful to everyone, and then Hitler appears, if you're being respectful to Hitler, maybe you're using the wrong strategy. Maybe coming down to Hitler's level, maybe that's the right strategy. I don't know. I'm still pondering this framework. I'm totally open to changing my mind, so definitely discuss this with me. What do you think is the best approach to a Hitler scenario? So I'll let you ponder that for a second. I would love to hear your comments. So often we have two good things that get polarized against each other, right? One side says safety is most important, and the other side says freedom, adventure, living your life, it's most important. Which is correct, right? COVID lockdowns or freedom to die and spread disease to kill people, right? It's a question of values. Which do you value more? What happens when one side says we want liberty and the other says we want equality, right? What if liberty leads to inequality? And what if equality leads to the lack of liberty? are we going to do these trade-offs, or how do we balance them? What if one side says collective well-being, even at the cost of individual rights? And the other side says we want individual rights, even if it costs collective well-being. These are tricky questions. I tend to think that the right approach is a synthesis, an integrative approach that says, yes, each of these things is valuable. We need to prioritize them in a hierarchy and say, yes, we want collective well-being, but maybe not to the extent of total sacrificing of rights, maybe a little bit of infringement on rights, but not complete. We want to balance these things against each other and not go too overboard in one direction. So the main idea here is that the transcendent perspective is to say, no, we're not going to vilify individual rights. It's not collective well-being is righteous and individual rights are evil. That's not the transcendent perspective. What we're saying is both are good, and we're going to synthesize them into a hierarchy and try to do both to different degrees of proportionality as appropriate to the situation. So now, in context of everything we've said so far, I want to show you a little animation that I animated personally, so forgive the low quality. And hopefully you'll be able to see the symbolism behind what's going on in this animation. So in this video, it starts off with the yin-yang. And within the yin-yang is this natural contrast between the two colors. And it's a symbol of natural conflict, right? And the dialectical perspective versus the debate perspective, there are two types of conflict, right? The debate perspective is destructive conflict, and the dialectical perspective is constructive conflict. And so what's being displayed here is at first they're engaging in debate. You know, the half of the yin-yang becomes the dragon, half of it becomes the phoenix. They're fighting with each other, trying to destroy each other. And you can see this play out in society, at the individual layer, at the political layer, at the geopolitical layer. It's, I'm good, you're bad, fight. I'm good, you're bad, fight, right? Human nature. But there's a way to transcend. The dialectical style of conflict says, hey, we're not going to destroy each other. We're going to combine. And so at the end of this animation, the dragon and the phoenix come together and they fuse into the Western dragon, the dragon that has wings, right? The Chinese dragon lacks wings. So he lacks an advantage that the other side has. And the phoenix, it lacks the skeletal structure. It lacks the claws and the teeth that the dragon has. And so by combining, the best of both get put together, right? Their weaknesses are mitigated and their strengths are combined. And so I think that's the value of this dialectical process. By synthesizing and coming together, all of our strengths get combined in a way that the sum is greater than the parts individually. So when thinking about political conflict or geopolitical conflict, I think it's useful to keep this in mind. Maybe there are some values that the opposing side has that would be useful to me, right? Or maybe the other country, they have a perspective that would be beneficial to us, right? Maybe we can incorporate some of their perspective, but the only way to incorporate is you have to learn, you have to empathize, you have to communicate, see things from their point of view, and then you can gain the benefit. But you might think this is too idealistic. How do we unify our values if they're fundamentally contradictory? Well, there's some philosophers who insinuate that we need to look at these conflicts from a higher vantage point. When we look at them from a higher location, it seems less contradictory. So for example, it seems like safety and freedom could be fundamentally contradictory. And so how do we reconcile that, right? Well, if we have a higher vantage point and we say, the purpose of freedom is the well-being of the soul, right? And the purpose of safety is also the well-being of the soul. And so then you've got this higher vantage point to where actually these two contradictory values, they're all supporting the same goal. And so the question is, what degree of safety right? How do we balance safety and freedom such that the appropriate balance maximizes well-being? And this is the hard part, because trying to measure these things is almost impossible. But I think with some ingenuity, with some effort, and with the right amount of creativity, I think we can make progress on a lot of these issues. So to take this back to integral theory, we can look at all these different color systems and we can start to brainstorm how their perspective fits into this understanding of values. And so if we start down at the bottom with beige, you can think about it in terms of power. What is the power structure at beige? You can think of it as the self. It's a very simple, small power structure. It's narrow in focus. It's not mature enough to have a big focus. It's just the self. What are they desiring? They're desiring survival. What is their method? Perhaps their method is selfishness, right? I care about myself and I do what I need for myself, right? What's the definition of goodness, right? Existence. I need to survive. How do I exist better, right? So what's your value priority at this level? Me before others. I'm the priority, right? That's a narrow perspective on reality, and it's not an optimal philosophy because we exist in a cooperative framework. So that's why we need to make sure we're leveling up past these lower perspectives. So the next level up is purple, and that's the tribal perspective. They're thinking about security. I need a band of people to make me feel safe. One of the methods of getting security is through loyalty, right? If I can verify that there's loyalty between us, then I feel secure. And maybe under this paradigm, their goodness is based on love. It's like, hey, I've got this little family, we're a little clan, and it's us against the world, and we love each other, and we're bonded together, and, right? There can be good elements to these lower perspectives. And so under this framework, the family would have a higher priority than the self, right? Once you have a tribe, then there's an aspect of, like, I would be willing to sacrifice for my tribe. Like, I care about my tribe, right? The tribe becomes a superorganism. The tribe is more important than the self at that point. So then at red, you level up past tribe into state. Under the state paradigm, it's more focused on power. And how do they get power? It's very similar. Instead of loyalty, it's patriotism. So instead of loyalty to the family, it's loyalty to the state, right? So they've got this power structure based on patriotism. And we've got this heroism element coming in where I'm going to die for the state. So the superorganism is growing. Instead of a tribal superorganism, it's a multi-tribal superorganism, and it's refining some of the lower elements. And so now the state becomes more important than family. And you find examples of this even in like the Soviet Union, where they were trying to rat out those who would betray communism. And the government encouraged family members to turn each other in. If your parents were preaching some anti-communist sentiments, report them to the government. So the state was more important than your familial bonds. And that mentality permeated society. And then at blue, you've got kind of the evolution of the church as an institution. And the church becomes more powerful than the state. The church focuses on a principle more refined than just power itself. The church focuses on order, right? So they obtain order through rules and obedience and compliance and guilt and interviews and confessions. And, and often cults will have this idea of you need to report if your neighbor is misbehaving, you need to report your neighbor's behavior to the cult. And so this church structure has this almost blackmail level influence on society. Now, that becomes superior than just the level of the state, because while patriotism can be powerful, this obedience mentality, I think it goes deeper into the psyche. You're redefining who they are at an even deeper level, because you're changing the definition of good and evil for their psyche. And what happens at this level is they focus on the goodness of obedience, and the church becomes even more important than the state. So the church is a higher order superorganism. The superorganism keeps growing in scope. Then we get to the orange level, and institutions start to play a role, right? You can think about orange as kind of the American project, the Enlightenment project, where instead of a monarchy, we've got like branches of government, right? We've got executive branch, we've got the judicial branch, legislative branch, and then we've got educational institutions, we've got scientific institutions. And so by building an ecosystem of organizations, that becomes a new superorganism. It's the connected layer of multiple intelligent organizations that are all working together harmoniously towards goals. And so this institution-based superorganism, they're geared for success. What is the goal of the institution? Okay, academic success, scientific success, right? They're trying to accomplish different goals. And so science becomes a strong element of this layer of consciousness. And a perspective on freedom, right? Free speech, free development of ideas, free debate of ideas, rights, right? The Enlightenment and America, they really emphasized like a Bill of Rights that kind of guarantees a baseline of well-being to individuals. And so at this level, you can kind of say the value priority puts science above church or institutions above church, right? Separation. There's a separation of church and state, but the church is subordinate to this ecosystem of institutions. All right. And going forward, the power structures start to get more vague because technically America is still operating at orange level politically. I don't know what a green political structure looks like. I don't know what a yellow political structure looks like. I don't know what a turquoise political structure looks like. So the higher we go up, the more and more this is just conjecture, right? I don't really know exactly. So this is just some ideas. Maybe at the green level, it's about grassroots efforts, right? The green perspective is kind of this equality perspective. There's this bringing in multiple perspectives, making sure everyone has a voice, that type of zeitgeist. There's an equity mentality that they're aiming for to make sure everyone has their proper say and their proper place in society. And the green zeitgeist is often connected to postmodernism. And postmodernism is kind of, it seems like it can be simplified into kind of this neo-skepticism, right? Skepticism being the idea that we can question everything, right? Our traditional values, well, that's all, we can question those. Like, where's the authority for these things, right? And so when you use skepticism, you can break down the traditional authorities and you can level the playing field. And so it's a useful tool for this green zeitgeist. And one of the fundamental values that they're aiming for is a concept of fairness, right? The idea behind equality is a type of equity is a type of fairness, right? And so at this level, fairness becomes more important than freedom. Fairness is more important than science, perhaps. Fairness, maybe it's more important than institutions. Like, fairness gets pushed up pretty high. And so some people get alarmed by that. It's like, what are you sacrificing at the altar of fairness? Like, so some people get scared of green because they think they're going to burn it all down on the altar of fairness. And that's kind of where yellow comes in. Yellow's like, yeah, fairness is important, but we want to make sure that we're balancing all these things. We're not only doing fairness, we're incorporating fairness in the hierarchy of needs. So this yellow zeitgeist, I tend to think of it as connected to philosophy, because this project of integrating, respecting, and unifying things together, it's very dialectical in nature, and philosophers were the ones who invented the dialect, the dialectical method. And so this project of using integration, using the dialectic to build this unity and this synthesis, it's extremely philosophical in nature. And I tend to think that the right approach to yellow is to orient the philosophy towards well-being, right? We're trying to unify our perspectives towards maximizing well-being. And so under this paradigm, well-being becomes a higher priority than fairness. So we want fairness to the extent it boosts well-being, but if fairness is decreasing well-being, that's when it goes too far. And regarding the power structure of yellow, I have no idea what a power structure for yellow would look like. It would probably be very complex. You'd probably need all of these institutions. But I tend to think that a philosophic perspective would be necessary to guide the design of the yellow stage, right? So power structure philosophers, it's a loose term for a philosophic design for a more robust system of institutions. That's kind of how I see it. Now for turquoise, philosophers are supposed to love wisdom. Sages are supposed to be the peak of wisdom, right? So maybe at the turquoise level, the best type of wisdom can design this structure. Maybe it's AI wisdom at that point, right? AI is probably going to surpass us. AI will probably be the sages for turquoise. And I think the value system that's higher than yellow is probably a stability mindset. And the methodology would be something around sustainability, and their goodness would be around temperance, right? Temperance is controlling your appetites, right? Capitalism goes too far. Consumerism, it's promoting gluttony. We need to reel that back. Asceticism, temperance, it's kind of going back to the ancient religious values in a way. And this sustainability would become a higher priority than well-being itself. And why is that? Because the evolutionary game theory, it's oriented towards what can survive in the long run. If you're focused on short-term well-being, you're going to hit a catastrophe and go extinct, right? And so humanity has a lot of dangerous extinction events in our near future. And so if we're focused only on short-term well-being, we're not going to be prepared for when those crises hit. And so a sustainable perspective balances everything, balances it against the future. That means we can maintain well-being over time. Instead of lots of well-being now and extinction, we can have sustainable well-being into the indefinite future. And that would be even better. So we've got value conflicts. We've got a hierarchy of value conflicts. Now we need to discuss the synthesis aspect, right? Transcending, it's about the synthesis. So, for example, you've got beige at the bottom and you've got purple as the next level up. Well, beige offers a thesis. Beige's thesis is, it's all about me. I gotta survive. I gotta do what I do for me. Purple has an antithesis that says, it's not all about you. It's about the family. And beige might say, purple, you're crazy. You would sacrifice yourself for your family. Your idealistic love is stupid, right? And so there's a tendency to strawman the value system you disagree with, right? Beige can easily strawman purple and say, your love is so naive. Everyone's going to betray you. Just focus on yourself, right? But if we want to transcend, we need to stop strawmanning our opposition, our value conflict, right? So if we can steelman our opponent, we might be able to understand them better. And if we understand them better, we might see our own flaws. And when we see our own flaws, then we can synthesize, take the good that we have, combine it with the good that they have, and build a better perspective. And so what we need to do here to transcend is to learn to migrate from strawmanning to steelmanning. Strawmanning is when you represent an opponent's argument in its weakest form, right? You're kind of mocking their argument. You're reducing it to this pathetic argument that's easy to refute, right? And the steelman is the opposite. The steelman is where you try to articulate your opponent's position in the most robust, advanced, nuanced, respectable way possible, right? And so this is an honorable way to discuss ideas, because if you can show why a steelman is wrong, then maybe you have the correct perspective. But if you can't show why a steelman is wrong, then maybe you have something to learn from that steelman, right? And so dealing with the strongest version of your opponent's arguments, that's, if you care about truth and goodness, you have to meet the standard head on, right? You have to deal with their best argument and to see if you can surpass that. Now, one of the useful things that I think transcendent philosophy should focus on is finding a way to build metrics, right? The value of measurability is so important because when you can measure things, it becomes objective. It's easy to disagree when we have these subjective perspectives, but when you have something measurable, it unifies people together. Both sides can agree, you're right, we measure it and it is the way you say it is. And so I've developed a little metric here for how to measure if something is a straw man versus a steel man. And it's a pretty simple metric, right? Straw man. If your opponent disagrees with your phrasing of their position, that is measurable evidence of a straw man. So if you say, purple ideology, they're suckers for, they'll just throw their life away on a dime for their family or something like that. If the purple person says, no, that's not what I believe, then that is measurably a straw man. Now the steel man is, if they agree to it, you can measurably offer a steel man if your partner says, you know what, you phrased that so well, I completely agree with your wording of it. So that is a metric that we should focus on optimizing and maximizing. So when beige starts to steelman purple, he starts to realize something. At first, his philosophy was, I care about life so much that I'm going to protect myself. But he doesn't realize that life, there's more to life than just yourself. There's future generations. And so purple, it cares about life too, but it's caring about the propagation of life. And so if you have a family and if you have children, if there's a predator, if you go sacrifice yourself to deal with the predator, you have promoted the life of your offspring. And there is a certain beauty to that maybe beige can appreciate. Beige is like, you know what? I care about life, and purple actually does a better job at promoting life than beige. And so they realize they have the same goal, different methodology. Beige can realize actually purple's methodology is superior to the beige methodology, and then beige can transcend. So these are some examples of some strawmen and some steelmen in the political landscape. Useful to take a look at, but don't really need to discuss it. But these are just to kind of get you into the frame of mind of, okay, this is what a straw man looks like, this is what a steel man looks like, okay? So the beauty of the yellow zeitgeist is yellow is all about trying to steel man all the other color systems. So they're going back down the ranks of the colors and saying, you know, there is some good at this level of analysis, and there's some good over here at this level of analysis. And so by steel manning it, it prepares you to integrate. And this project of integration is very complex, but very important, because all of these levels of conflict that we have, conflict can either be done peacefully or it can be done violently. And nobody's going to like violent conflict. Nobody's going to like it. And so if we can figure out how to skillfully and utilize all the wisdom at our disposal to figure out how to massage these conflicts and arrive at more unific conclusions, it's going to take better communication. And so by leveling up our communication from straw manning to steel manning, by trying to respect different points of view, I think we've got a better chance at persuasion and leveling up. And when it comes to the topic of violence, there is an issue with revenge, right? Because conflict, it's going to happen, and it has happened, and it will happen. And even violent conflict can and will happen. And so there becomes a point where we have to learn how to transcend even the violence itself. And that may not be easy. And so I've tried to build a paradigm for how we can accomplish the transcending of violence. And right here is an image that discusses the cycle of revenge. And the fundamental flaw of this cycle of revenge is a us versus them mindset. You look and there's two individuals, or a team A and a team B, and both of them have this narrative in their head. I'm the good guy, that's the bad guy, right? That's the fundamental psychology. I'm good, they're bad. If you think that way, it's easy to justify violence. They deserve it, they're bad, they're evil. And the problem is, if both sides have the same narrative, then it's never-ending violence. Because both sides say, you deserve it, violence. You deserve it, violence. And they keep going back and forth. And each time one side is violent, it's not evidence that they're the good guy, it's more evidence that they're the bad guy. So each person thinks, oh, I am the self-righteous deliverer of justice. The other person doesn't see that. The other person sees a villain. Okay? This is the problem. This can happen between nations. Different nations are doing antagonistic activities, and one nation says, oh, I'm putting all of my boats here because I'm the righteous one protecting the world. And the other nation says, you're the villain trying to provoke a conflict, trying to bully me with all your boats. Right? It's a toxic cycle that just goes downward and downward until it explodes into horrific violence. So in trying to figure out how to reverse the cycle of revenge, I think Christianity developed some ideas that are very helpful here, right? The fundamental idea here is the love your enemies principle. If you love your enemy, that provides the certain context to completely shift the paradigm. What do I mean here? The other person views you as a villain, right? And they view you as a villain because of historical context. Maybe there were some mistakes made in the past. Maybe there was some misinterpretations, miscommunications. They view you as a villain. So if you do anything negative, it's going to reinforce the villain mentality. So when you love your enemies, that's when you turn the other cheek. So if your enemy wants to punish you, turning the other cheek is to accept it and to not get revenge. Right? And what does this act do? When you turn the other cheek, you are debunking their narrative. In their head, they're saying, this is a villain. And then they go out and self-righteously punish the villain. And when the villain returns revenge and responds with love, that throws them off guard. They're like, wait a second, I thought you were a villain. How is this even possible? Right? And so if you respond with love, continuous love in response to their hatred, that will debunk the villain narrative. And eventually they'll be forced to realize you're not a villain, and they'll realize they're an idiot. They were an idiot to be harmful towards you, and then they can level up and become one of your friends. Right? That's the ideal scenario for reversing the cycle of revenge. And so once you build this connection, once they trust you as a friend, right? You've shown a pattern of love. They completely change. Now they're on your side. What happens now? Instead of fighting each other, hurting each other, downward spiral of war and destruction, now you've got an ally. You can cooperate. You can share technology. You can develop and grow each other. Like, why do enemies need to exist? Why can't we be friends with every nation in the world, right? It's just a paradigm shift. It's like we could be cooperating, developing together, but we have to get past this villain mentality. So one useful thing to think about from evolutionary biology is tit for tat, right? Tit for tat is a fundamental game theoretic principle of evolutionary psychology. If you do a bad thing to me, I will do a bad thing to you, right? Tit for tat. But if you do a good thing to me, I will do a good thing to you. So when the cycle of revenge is the negative tit for tat, and the cycle of friendship is the positive tit for tat. Whereas now we're in a positive cycle, we're trading with each other, we're growing from each other's technology, we're increasing each other's well-being, right? This reciprocity is a fundamental part of evolutionary psychology that we could tap into, right? If we're trying to make the world a better place, if we're trying to increase collective well-being, we need to be tapping into fundamental reciprocity instead of fundamental revenge. And part of this transcendence project is understanding the obstacles to transcendence, right? Anti-transcendence or de-transcendence. What if some people don't want to level up? Or what if some people can't level up, right? What then? So part of this is going to be exploring what are these obstacles. Sometimes people are resistant to change. Maybe that's a good thing, right? Maybe some change is dangerous, a conservative resistance to change. Maybe we can respect that. So then we have to do the hard work of proving to them that this change is reliable, that this change is not as risky as they think it is, right? If we can understand the root of the resistance, then we can help massage and facilitate those issues. And another thing we need to consider and perhaps worry about is the concept of detranscendence, which is instead of moving up the layers, moving down the layers, right? So we have to be careful about what conditions motivate people to regress instead of progress. And perhaps material insecurity, right? If the economy goes down, maybe people start regressing because they don't feel as safe. Maybe there's a certain degree of safety that's necessary for progress. And so if we're trying to help promote transcendence, we need to navigate those types of issues properly. And just a final thought on the psychology of transcendence. Carl Jung, he conceptualized this idea of a transcendent function in the mind, where Carl Jung's conception of the unconscious had a relationship to the conscious. And so the shadow had a relationship with the self. And that relationship was the transcendent function, where sometimes some of these deeper feelings need to propagate up into consciousness. And sometimes these more cognitive ideas need to propagate downwards into the unconscious. And so transcendence is about synthesizing the unconscious with the conscious, right? The transcendent function functioned as a bridge between this shadow and this ego. And so there was this inner dialectic that was at play, where there was a thesis and an antithesis in the brain. And the brain has to figure out how to level up when it reaches its own contradictions. And so all of society and all of these social structures and these superorganisms, they all reduce to the individual mind. And so if we can figure out how to help individual minds level up and transcend, maybe that learning can propagate out and help benefit all the other layers of analysis. So thank you for listening, and thank you for participating, and I hope that we can work on this together and make the world a better place.